All right, we are live. I'm going to give it a couple minutes for people to jump on before I do the official intro, but anybody in the comments, say hello. Let us know if you're watching so that I can make sure that the comments are actually working. I'm new to StreamYard. Okay. Oh, there we go. Some people are jumping in. Hey, guys. All right, I think I'm just going to jump in and do the intro and we'll get started. Hey friends, this is Tori. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am super excited. I have a very special guest on the channel for yet another author interview. Joined by my friend Andrew. Andrew, feel free to introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Andrew Meredith. I am the author of Thrice, which is a semifinalist in this year's SBFBO, which is the self-published fantasy blog off. And I'm a semifinalist there. This is the 8th year that that's been running, and that's my Slavic fantasy that I wrote in the Needle and Leaf trilogy. And I'm also the author of a couple of other books, but I'm not going to say their names because that's why we're here, because there's a little bit of a change that's happening with my series that I started off kind of as an arc phase, an advanced reader phase in July, and today's a big day.
That's awesome. So with that, we're going to jump right into it. Hi, Kay. Hi, Andrew. Hi, Kevin. See, the problem is there's too many Andrews. That's the problem.
There's never enough Andrews.
It's way too many Andrews. So you are releasing a brand new book on November 1st, and that is the first in your collation saga. So
Correct.
Can you give us like a brief synopsis of the book and how this kind of switch from the books that they were before to what we're releasing now?
Yeah. So the book that is being released is titled Deathless Beast. It is going to be the first book in the collation saga. And it follows the journey of Hannon and Ralia Clow. They're siblings, they're bodyguards, and they have a fairly decent business sense. And they've been running a caravan up and down a continent for about 5 years. But bad luck always just seems to just be on their doorstep, and less than savory companions who are kind of low lives who become mercenaries and bodyguards. And so they have an old friend who actually got them set up in the position in the first place, comes to town and says, let's get out of here. And they say, happy to, and they leave town. But when they get to their location, they are immediately hounded by another ex-Black Sentinel who was using vermin to harass the caravan to solve the problem and make things go away, only it didn't. He gets booted, sells his soul to a dark god, becomes a cursed of a dark god, so on and so forth. And they got to deal with that. But it's a multi-POV story. So it also follows the story of a paladin, because you can't have a fantasy without a good holy order in there.
Absolutely.
And his whole organization appears to be falling apart while he's being called into a deeper faith. And then the third POV is a physician, Katiam, who was kind of forced to become the physician to the old leaders of both of the holy orders, because they're her great aunt and uncle. And so she's never felt like she's had a choice in her life. And she picks up a mysterious seed pod off of a desk, and who knows what happens with it. So, and
awesome.
And so that's basically, it doesn't spoil anything, but that's book 1. And it used to be the Collation Legacy book 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
It was a mistake that I made marketing wise, because I was basing my marketing on 2019 figures, and it's not 2019. In fact, 2 decade long years have occurred in those last 2 years.
Yep.
And everything's changed for the better. And so I said, you know what? This is early enough in this book's life. I need to pull it and relaunch it and do it the way that I always wanted to do it in the first place. And so we get Deathless Beast now.
Awesome. Yeah. So you have mentioned that this is a saga. How many books total will we be getting by the time this is done?
Probably 16.
Okay.
I've got 8 outlined. I've got the first 4 very heavily outlined. Those will be out in the course of this year, next year. at latest spring of 2024. The first 4 big volumes will be out.
Awesome.
I know what's happening in the next 8. I might take a year off, but I would also love to just keep going.
Yeah.
After I finish the first 8, there will be probably a year or 2 break before I do the other half of the major series. So,
that makes sense. That's kind of beyond the saga, and we're more into like epic saga territory now.
Yes.
So,
but in my defense, all 16 books, including if I write any ephemera, still will not be any thicker than 3 Stormlight Archives.
That's good. I like that. Yeah. And I think a lot of your readers will too. They will thank you because they won't. So
it's not that long. It's not Sanderson long.
Right. That's good.
You can do it, Andrew.
Yeah. We've got, let's see, Sarah. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Ash. Got some people jumping in. Wizard's already complaining, and we haven't even hardly started yet.
There will not be 10 years between books. I swear this to you.
Who is this lovely person joining us in the comments here?
I don't know. Good last name, though.
All right. So you had showed me before we went live, you had some original art that you had been working on in the past to show everybody. And it's gorgeous. And I definitely wanted to give you a chance to show it off.
So, so I now use Incarnate because I need clean maps in my books that will print really well.
Yep.
But I have done drawings before, and I will probably do drawings again. But this is 2000 and I'm going to guess this is probably 2016.
So you said this isn't even the first version of this map.
No, the first version was bad. The first version had like 4 nations, total 1980s fantasy, 4 nations and nothing more across the whole world when I was a child. And so I've added countries since then. And that's just one continent. And where most of the first, at least 4 books take place is in that continent. And and also you can tell from that picture, it was very, very just straight up, oh, look, it's Europe. And I've since then pushed things around and retraced where people come from. So, it isn't necessarily Vikings up north. They came from Spain first, from the Spanish nation, and then moved in there. So I have lots of very different moving family lines, all plotted out because I'm a dork.
I think most of us fantasy readers are pretty dorky. So I think, is this the point in the live where you want to officially, finally, these poor people that we've been driving insane on Twitter for the last week, would you like to actually show them the official cover of?
I don't know. Are they ready?
I don't know. I don't know if they're ready. Maybe we should show them another blurry cover.
All right.
I think Bo just wants us to show a blurry cover down there.
That's all you're getting, Bo. Sorry. Thanks. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
The background is all you're getting. That's the cover, everyone. All right. You want to show it first, and then I'll put it up on the screen?
All right. You got it. All right. So cover reveal of Deathless Beast. See if I can get it to come up. Dun, dun, dun. Da-na.
Drum roll, please.
Dun, 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 dun.
And I am actually going to put this up on the screen for everybody so they can get a really good look at it here. There you guys go. The official cover for Deathless Beast, Collation Saga Volume 1. You've seen it here on my channel first, unless you're Andrew and you saw it already, and so that's cheating, and we're not going to talk about it. So there it is. So going back, while everyone appreciates this cover, going back to when you first had the idea for this book, what was the original nugget that started this incredibly ambitious 16-book saga?
It was a very different story 10 years ago in that it had some of the same characters. It did not have it didn't have any plot. It was just a story of people traveling, because that's what you do in epics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And no, that's not what you do in epics. So I quit it for 5, 6, 7 years, and then discovered hey Thiago, I discovered Writing Excuses, which is Brandon Sanderson and
Yes.
Dan Wells and whatnot back in 2016. And I said, I think I'm ready to write it. But there's this podcast, right? And there were 10, no, I think there was almost 12 seasons at that time. I listened to all 12 seasons. Yeah, every night I'd listen to a few episodes, and it always ends with the line, "Now you're out of excuses, now go write." And I got to the end of the 12 seasons, and I had no more excuses. I had to write. And I'd had some life events happen, and I was like, you know what? I need something to do. And so I wrote 175,000 words in a month and a half.
Wow.
and I spent about 2 months working up to that, writing some short stories. Torvar was one of the short stories I wrote to kind of figure out my pacing.
Yeah.
And then I wrote 175,000 words, which is effectively what is in books 1 and 2 of the Collation Saga. And then it got shorter, it got longer, it got split, it got big. So there was lots of changes from who had Katyan's POV was very, very small at the beginning. And over time, I was able to give her a lot more space so that she could tell the story that she was part of.
Yeah.
So, so the nugget that actually started it goes even farther back to 25 years ago when I was a kid and wrote, a story of a dude leaving a farm, like every fantasy in the 80s.
Yeah.
And his 3 friends, and one of them is going to be the brute, and one of them is going to be Sly, and one of them is the pretty girl, and blah blah blah. And yeah, it's not that story anymore at all. In fact, I didn't have any romance in it until I rewrote this in the last 2 years. The latest version of book 2 is where an interest does show up, I promise. But it's not a huge plot point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is just me, but I'm always a big fan of understated romantic elements in fantasy. So I'm very excited to read this. I've read Thrice, as you know, and can't recommend it highly enough. I think it's a great book. And I was going to mention, you mentioned Torvar's story, which I was going to bring up quickly because I read it this last week. If you have not signed up for Andrew's mailing list, his website's down in the description box. And if you haven't read that short story that you get with the mailing list yet, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. And the first thing I did was I went to Twitter and I said, all right, Andrew, where's the rest of this book? So you got to put that on your radar at some point to finish Torvar.
I will.
I
know what's going to happen with it.
If you're ever bored writing 16 other books.
That's right.
Yeah. So when you mentioned several of your POVs when we started, and I'm always curious to hear how people choose their main characters and like what makes them the right character to tell this story. So feel free to expand on that for this one.
Yeah. Sometimes it's an accident, right? So like, in Deathless Beast, you meet the 2 Clows, who are Hannon and Ralia Clow. The original main character, 25 years ago, was named Hannian, and he disappeared very soon after, and it got replaced by the character Rawl, who was very obviously a stand-in for me. And that was part of the issue with why the story wasn't working 10 years ago, is because he was an absolute Mary Sue. He was just me in the book, period. Yep. Me as I will never be. And so when I wrote this new version in 2017, part of Killing My Darlings was switching it so it was 2 brothers, and then later to a brother and sister, as I was trying to figure out what would best up the stakes for it. And Hannon showed back up as this other brother, and then became the main character again. And because his was the story that needed to be told, and Ralia was not ready to have her story told yet. And so her story doesn't really happen until books 6 through 8. So who's giving us trouble now?
All of them, but yeah, Andrew has a different Mary Sue name here.
Gary Sue. But Jinnid was the weird one. He was always the side character. He was always just the big lug he's the paladin. And because I decoupled his story from the Clows entirely, he comes back together, but they only interact side by side. They aren't part of each other's story. Because I did that, all of a sudden he had a great story to tell, and he's my favorite character to write. He's the easiest to write, and he is to quote Fight Club, he is Andrew's irritation with life. at times.
Sure.
Because he even more so than Joven. Joven keeps a lot of his thoughts to himself, and Jinnah does sigh a lot when things are going wrong around him, because there's nothing he can do about it. So why bother?
Right.
And and Jinnah is so easy to write. Katian, however, is not easy to write. She was a main character out of necessity as a tertiary character, and as she's grown, she's become such a joy to write. But she is the hardest to write. If I have to write a section on Katian, it's going to be weeks of me writing a chapter, because she's just harder to write.
Yep.
Because she's not based on me at all. She's based on other people I know, but that can make it harder. It's a lot easier when you're just writing yourself into things at times.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah. Or like you said, the version of yourself that you think you could be or want to be.
Exactly.
Which usually ends up being a much more souped up character than it needs to be.
Yeah.
One of the things that I thought of right away when you were talking about these is, I know in Thrice you use a lot of Slavic folklore, both in your creatures and the world building in general. So is the Collation Saga also rooted in some kind of folklore, or was that something that you chose a completely different inspiration?
Yeah, originally it was basic standard fantasy with elves and dwarves and this one other race that I made up, and I realized I wanted a bit weirder, so I removed everything but humans. Not to the point that there's only humans. I removed all the elves and replaced them with a totally not elf, in that they're amphibian and not elves, but they're very elvish.
Sure.
But the really fun part has been with the development of the animals, because I removed every animal from the world and only replaced it with mythological creatures. So if it's a bird, it's an eagle with 4 wings. If it's a horse, it's a 6-legged. I know they're supposed to be 8, but it's a 6-legged Sleipnir. There's griffins instead of crows. There's centipede dragons instead of snakes. And yeah, so that's been fun, is to take so it's a European fantasy. Great. How can I make it weird by putting in all mythological creatures?
Yeah. That's a commitment, honestly. I was very impressed by that. I wanted to highlight Patricia's comment. I wanted to highlight Trisha's comment because I think, we talk about writing characters that take a lot more thought and slow us down, because we really have to think about how we're writing this character and making sure the voice stays authentic and all of that. And I think, it just goes to show that when you put the time into really figuring out those characters, that they can be some of the most rewarding at the end.
They are.
So we have a question. Andrew's raising his hand over here.
Yeah. So he says, sorry, you were asking. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Andrew is asking you, Andrew, to define Slavic for him.
Yeah. So Slavic is a very general term in the way that saying a Norse mythology would be anything Scandinavian and Denmark and maybe Baltic as well. Slavic would be anything Eastern European out through Russia. So it can be Polish, like The Witcher is a Slavic fantasy because it's Polish. Yeah, but that's not Russian. It's not Slavic historically, but they have the same monsters and the same Baba Yaga type stories that are occurring in their mythology. So so it's definitely a Venn diagram, right? And Eastern European is, I went into Eastern European / Slavic as the shorthand for that, because it is just weird enough for us who are so used to Europe, right? Isn't Europe just France, Spain, and England, and Germany? No, that's 1/3 of Europe. There is so many more nations over there that are dark to us that it's just been fun but they still have a lot of things they share with Western mythology too.
Yeah, absolutely. Unsurprisingly, Thiago is hyping the Griffins.
Hey, Thiago, you may have gotten Griffins out first, but I've been doing Griffins since before you were born, son.
Sarah's excited about fantasy critters. Yeah, I think that is something that I can definitely promise readers of Andrew's books, having read Thrice. There are all sorts of incredibly fascinating and fresh, I guess, to me, fantasy critters. So it's definitely, if you're an animal person or just creatures in general. I don't know. There's
and for those of you on the
Accords,
if you're looking for your fantasy companion, I'll have a fantasy companion in December for you.
Awesome. I'm trying to follow this conversation in the comments, and I think I'm just going to move to the next question. I'm so confused. I don't know what they're talking about, wizards and griffins. I'll let them do that. So I was reading your blog the last few days just to kind of get some fodder for questions and to get a little bit of insight into your writing process. And I really liked your blog posts on Netflix pacing and how that works in storytelling and in writing books. So you kind of chose an episodic narrative style for Thrice. And I'm really curious what made you decide to go for that, and what you thought that could, like, why you thought that could tell the story better than a different format.
Yeah. So the caveat is that with collation, I write much longer chapters. They're 3,500 to 5,000 word. There are authors who write even bigger chapters, but I write pretty fat chapters. And so I set a challenge for myself to write a book that moved as fast as a Dresden novel. And those tend to be a few pages and there's a drop, few pages and a drop. But I didn't want there to be a drop every single chapter. I grew up reading a lot of comic books, and comic books always tend to run in a 12 story arc. But those 12 story arcs are actually written into 6 story arcs. And so you get these small episodes of, and that's what Netflix then adopted with, they did it in Stranger Things, but they especially did it in the Marvel Netflix shows. So like Daredevil's a great example of that. 12 episodes, it might be 10, but the first half is one story. Second half is another story, but together they're a full story. And so I wanted to try to tell a story that was like those comics that you probably are, when you're writing a big epic, you want to write a chapter, and then at the end of the chapter, maybe you put it down. Maybe there's a drop, but you're like, you know what? I'm good. I'm going to set it down. And that's okay. If you write a book that is really fast paced, you want to have at the end of the chapter where you say, should I just keep reading? Right. And I didn't want to do that to everybody. I wanted everybody able to get through 2 chapters and say, now I'm good, because now I feel satisfied. I love going to a concert where you finish their set and you're like, that was not enough. It was an hour and a half. I need more. You start shouting out encore. Jason Mraz has the best example of that. He shows back up and does another hour set after that. And then you go home, you're like, you know what? I'm good now. I don't need anything else. I'm going to go to sleep. It was a good concert. I'm happy. And that's what I want to bestow on my readers, is not just, oh, I got to keep going. Oh, I have to keep going. No, you got to keep going a little bit. And then you're like, I'm good. I've finished the episode, and I can pick it up tomorrow. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I grew up watching anime. And so for me, like, that episodic kind of version of storytelling feels very familiar. And it's almost like a comfort read because of that, I think, that in a lot of ways it mirrors kind of your youthful protagonist and the way that we kind of get those little episodes of their story. And it was a really fun read, and I was glad because it kind of was a shift for me of the format of the things that I've been reading before that. So yeah, I think it works really well in Thrice. Thank you. Yeah. If anybody has any questions in the comments below, feel free to post those and I will put them up on the screen for Andrew to answer. Trisha has a book request. I can do that. Yeah, I feel like that's something that you and JCM Burns should co-write together. Yeah, I think that would work very well. Well, I know Thiago was saying we need to do an anthology of Griffin stories. Absolutely, that would be amazing. Tori needed to. Oh, okay, Andrew, I'll do a top 5 anime for you. Oh man, as expected, this comment section. Okay. One of the things that I heard actually pretty late in my writing career, sadly, but it's a common phrase that you'll hear is write the book you want to read. And
And I think that that's a really good thing to keep in mind. Well, because a lot of people want to jump in and try like these wild new radical ideas, which is all good, but still making sure that you love writing it so that the readers can feel that through the book. So for you as a reader, what are the things that are story elements that really pull you into a story and keep you reading, things that you love, things that you enjoy in multiple books? And did you pull anything of that into your books?
Yeah. I like a story that's going to take its time.
Yeah.
And not necessarily like it doesn't have to be a slow burn. I mean,
Yeah.
Chicago's a great example, right?
Yep.
It takes its time.
Yep.
It is not a slow burn.
Yeah.
It burns hot, but it's not on fire, right?
Right.
It just goes, and you're like, I'm gonna keep reading because I want to keep reading, not because I must keep reading.
Right.
Because it's a juggernaut, right?
Yep.
And so I like a good pace that's gonna be set, and it's gonna keep going, and has been planned out. But one of the things that I love, and the only 4 moms in the comments are gonna enjoy this, is I love Bluey. And there is nothing like a moment in Bluey where it pans away and shows a beetle crossing a sidewalk.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the artists, it's the animators, which Disney animators do the same thing, where they put in things for themselves. And it's like they're making art and they're telling a story. And just to take a moment, I call it moments of normalcy. And that's what I do put in my yeah, you can put that on the Accords.
I will. Yeah.
That moments of normalcy is really important to me, and I try to put it in all my books.
Yep.
Because of that, Andrew the Blue Wizard has called me cozy for that, and I will wear that on my sleeve.
Yeah, I love that.
That I love moments of normalcy. I love seeing, as much as sometimes I give Rothfuss a hard time online, I loved his board game, and not just as a board game designer. I appreciated they sat there and had a whole chapter sitting there playing chess with a brand new game. It didn't even really give you the rules well enough, which I also appreciated. It was just enough for you to get the idea of the game. And it was a moment of normalcy, but also was plot pushing too. So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I think there was a moment in Thrice, and it's not a frog because it wouldn't be a frog, but there's a part where Leaf is just kind of like things are a little, how do I put this? Stressful, and Leaf is just hopping around after some creature in the grass. And I remember really loving that in that moment of stress, having this reminder that, even in perilous situations, kids will just notice a frog or a caterpillar or whatever it is. So I love that. And I think oftentimes we focus so much on the big, the grand in fantasy that we miss those moments. So I love when I find them in books.
And it's that comfort bit too. I mean, like in the Bulgariad's a good example is who doesn't think of Paul's kitchen?
Yeah.
Because that's how it starts, is in the kitchen and she's cooking. And so what child hasn't had a grandma or an aunt who's baking bread? Yep. And so it's a moment of normalcy. It's a moment to realize that no matter how crazy this plot's going to be, the world goes on around even the heroes. What was the quote I gave Trisha the other day? My heroes live in the margins of greatness.
Yeah, I like that.
That there's much bigger things happening at play, even for most heroes, and you see that much more in Joven's story, especially in book 2. Half of his story takes place outside of where the battles are actually happening.
Right.
And because he's nothing, he's just this dude with a beard and a kid. So because his beard grows back, he has a year to grow it back, I promise.
That's really good. Yeah, Joven without a beard feels kind of weird. No. We have a couple questions for you. So Kevin from Silverstone's Books wants to know, where should new readers start with your work?
Good question. I would say both of these books are entry points into my writing. Thrice is 1 book, and it will be 3 books. Second book will be out next April is the plan, and probably a year between books on that one. That one's a quick read. It's half the size of this. You can read Thrice in 2 days, and this will be book 1 of the big boy of the Collation Saga, and it is it's my baby. Thrice was the book I wrote while I was letting collation settle for a bit, and it happened, and I fall in love with Thrice more and more, and yeah, and Trisha will tell you that. She's like, I hope you don't hate Joven and Leaf anymore. I says, no, I love them. They're great. I want to get back to collation though.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I totally get that, because I think just like with reading, in reading all these big fantasy tomes, I do like to put, comfort reads in between those to kind of as a palate cleanser, but also to just, I don't know, kind of take a break from the as we talked about, the big and the grand for a little bit. So maybe Thrice would be a good like intermediate between.
Who was it online who's reading it after they finish Crystal Matar's book? He said after your emotional damage from that, you can read my book as a palate cleanser, and he's almost done with that. Who was reading that anyway? But yeah, it is a palate cleanser. It's definitely a palate cleanser. It's a very small world. I mean, the whole thing takes place on a peninsula the size of, well, it's Crimea Peninsula effectively, with mountains, but about the size of Wales if you know your English countryside. So.
Yeah. So is it in the same world as the Collation Saga?
It's not.
Completely different world.
If I went back, I might do it, but there would be no way to decouple it when it comes to Pantheon and magic and how the two of them interplay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wizard wants to know why a needle maker with Joven, which is actually a question that I would love to know the answer to too.
Yeah,
because
I thought I was being funny. I the picture, like, have you read Bone, the comic Bone?
No.
And there's the huge guy who runs the tavern, and he's just nothing but a barrel. And the idea of a huge blacksmith who's tinkering over little needles, I just thought was hilarious. Yeah. So that's why I did it. It was just to be funny. I made a list of things when I started out the book that I'd say, let's just go. I want to write a story within 2 weeks. I'm going to start this thing. From planning to go without huge world building. And I started at it and wrote it over 3 months at work. I was getting up every morning and driving to work and writing in the lobby for a couple hours. And I thought I was being clever, but it was fun research too. So I got to research Slavic folklore. I got to research how needles are made. I know how to do some blacksmithing enough just from being a geeky kid and have friends who are now professional sword makers. But needles are very, very cool and different, because you take a wire and then you fold it over and then you weld it, and that's how you get the eye. The eye isn't punched through. It's pretty cool.
Interesting. Yeah. Huh. Yeah, it's researching books brings you to all sorts of different things that sometimes you're like, how did I get here?
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Trisha wants to know, are you going to design and release any games in your books?
Yes. Yes. There's not as many games in Leaf and Needle, Needle and Leaf, because that's just not what something Joven would do. So you don't see a lot of games in that, but there are 4 different cultural board games, 3 that I've shown so far in the books. And I try to just vaguely hint at how they play. Like, that's totally Tnuffle. And that's totally a bit of chess meets Magic the Gathering. I know how it works. And so, yes, I would like to release them. I will 100% do a war game when I'm ready. Because I do have a history of board game design, which is why she's bringing that up. I worked for Fantasy Flight Games and have a few designs, so I know how to design a game. But I 100% want to do a war game that takes place before the Collation Saga, about 70 years earlier.
Okay, nice. It's almost like Trisha has the inside scoop or something.
I know. What a seed! What a great seed.
Everybody's complaining about their very sad childhoods in the comments about not having bakers in their family.
So that's the challenge then. Do it for your kids.
Yeah, exactly. My husband bakes, but Chiago, just to make you feel better, my mother and grandmother did not really bake much either. My grandfather made candy for Christmas. That's like the one. Yeah. He makes excellent caramels. My mom cooks, but my grandmother, she cooked. She got experimental. So and experimental meant she meant mac and cheese with all of the crumbs at the bottom of all of their cereals they had been collecting. So stale. Yep. Yeah. Chiago is using it as a palate palate cleanser after his own book's emotional damage. That's fair.
That's why I need to get your beta before it's winter, so I can read it before seasonal depression sets in. Thiago.
Thrice also has the best last line ever. It is very, very good.
I can't read it on the air. It would give too much away.
Yep, it would, but it's still a good line.
Yeah.
There you go. Chiago's reading into the needle maker for us.
Yeah.
It could, Chiago. Maybe it does.
Maybe it does.
Let's see. Okay, so moving on to my next question.
Okay.
We have talked a little bit on Twitter. We had a conversation, I want to say like a week ago, about children, characters and POVs in fantasy, and specifically like intellectual children, I think, in fantasy, but just in general. Why do you think that children perspectives in fantasy are so important?
Yeah. So, because when they're wrong, they're really bad. And when they're right, they take us right into the story.
Mm-hmm.
A well-written child in a book is like a well-written horse. Those who know horses know a bad horse when they see one. And most people, even if they don't know a child, they know when something's pretty off, right?
Yes.
And so it lets you up the stakes, right? Even though I'm not Stephen King. I'm sorry, Andrew Wizard. I'm not Stephen King. I don't kill children off. But he does that too to improve, to have endangerment, right? To up the ante. But you can still up the ante without full child endangerment, right? You can still have a child who's kidnapped. Oh, was he kidnapped or wasn't he? Well, let's find out. And there's probably more to the story than you want to know. I mean, look at yourself as an adult watching Disney movies now than when you were a kid. Kids getting in danger is literally what all of the early 90s middle grade reading was based on, right?
Yep.
Some kid gets stranded on an island because the kid wants to imagine being stranded on an island. Who doesn't, right?
Yep.
And then the parent reads it and goes, oh, I could never let my child go on a desert island all by themselves. And it's like, yeah, but it's an adventure story. So yeah, it's for the parents more than anything.
Oh yeah, and that's something that I noticed right away in Thrice as a parent myself, like reading within the first few pages of Thrice and seeing the relationship and interactions between Joven and Leaf. It's so authentic, and it's something where I was right away, it's like you can tell that these are being influenced by conversations that Andrew has had, with his own children, and that lends such a wholesome quality. I mean, that's more of that kind of cozy fantasy feel. That I think honestly we need more of that. I love seeing young protagonists and child POVs in fantasy when they're done really well. And yeah, I read the first chapter of Crystal Matar's book the other day, and right away I was like, yep, she's a parent. Like you can see it right away. She said something about like a hurricane in the baby pram, and I was like, yep, I've been there.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's really fun as a parent to see those little moments in other people's books where you can see right away where the influence is coming from.
Yeah.
Wizard, I am not going to answer that question.
Fine.
Currently Andrew Meredith, because I'm talking to him on my channel.
Yeah.
So if you want to be my favorite, you need to come on my channel.
It's true.
That's all I'm going to say about that.
Or let her into your Discord at a higher level without having to pay out the cash.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yes. Talking about horses named Cowboy. That's a whole video topic for a different day. So let's see. Children in fantasy, going back to, you kind of mentioned a little bit of your early influences with comics and that kind of stuff, but what are some of the books / authors that you read as a child, young adult, or even early in your writing career that you feel like really encouraged or influenced you?
I went through, so in 20, it's not when I was a kid. Well, so when I was a kid, I was reading Eddings and Dragonlance and probably way too much of that over and over again. And
Sure.
I've spent a lot of time decoupling myself from those tropes that I've been kind of stuck in for a long time, realizing, oh no, I had a character who was named blatantly out of one of those books, and I was like, oh man, that's so bad. And so I had to rename a whole bunch of people in order to get them away from that influence. Not that it's a bad influence, but it was somebody else's story, not mine. Right. It was too much of a fanfic. But I stopped reading fantasy for about a year in 2009 and switched over to some historical stuff like Pillars of the Earth and Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. So I was reading a lot of stuff about the monastic orders. So that was a huge influence on my paladins. Writing good paladins has not just been this is going to be fun. It's been a very, very serious effort of mine, because I could go into a very long, and I won't tirade about badly written paladins, even in just video games, but it's just like they can be done better. And I read Pillars of the Earth and I was like, oh, a monastic order that these are real people and not just people being holy for the holy sake. Right. And so I wrote my paladins based on that and did a lot of research into that to try to capture that. So I was doing a lot of that historical. And then of course I discovered Brandon Sanderson at that point, because I was looking at all the fantasy shelves. I had read some Hobb and loved that, but hadn't gotten back to her yet. And someone handed me a Sanderson and said, no, there's still hope in fantasy. You got to read this. It's not just the same old thing over and over again. Read it and I was like, oh my word, this is it. Something new. And I just enjoyed it, devoured it.
Yeah. Let's see. Trisha brings up some historical mystery, also some books possibly. Yep.
Yeah. I wish I knew an author who wrote historical mystery and said in 1901.
Yeah, I've been looking for some to read lately.
What's that over your shoulder over there?
Oh, I should probably pull those over. I just got these today. So for anyone who doesn't know, Patricia Meredith is Andrew's lovely wife, and she is a historical murder mystery author. And she sent me these beautiful copies of her books, and I'm very, very excited to read them. So
book 3 comes out next 25th is 5 days. So that's next Tuesday. Next Tuesday is her. Yep. That one comes out on Tuesday. Yep.
I got it before everybody else. Awesome.
Yeah, you did. Yeah. You just got to read them all this weekend now.
I'll try. I got to finish. So Trisha will laugh at this, and this is a total aside, but I'm currently reading Khan Eagledon's first Genghis Khan book. And my plan, once I finish that, is reading Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker by Trisha. And I'm like, I don't know if I could find a bigger brain switch than going from Genghis Khan to 1901 Spokane, Washington.
It's a pretty big switch, because you're going to switch from green tea and oolong to black tea.
That is a pretty major switch. I'm not going to lie. So title of book 1 is Butcher Baker Candlestick Taker. Yep. You guys need to put these on your TBR.
Short synopsis is that, there's a murder, right? And Spokane has in 1881, there was a great fire that burnt all of Spokane downtown, and not as big as Chicago, but still that's a lot to burn down. And the person who burnt the city down, might be striking again.
And then we have book 2, which is Cupboards All Bared. And she's using some very cool, freaky photographs from, I was going to say ancient times. My brain is still in the Genghis Khan book. Yep. I mean, it's mostly ancient on the covers. And then the third one, which apparently is not out yet, is Crazy Maids in a Row. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm very excited to read these. It's going to be a very good, as we were talking about palette cleansers in between all my fantasy books, I am very much in the mood for something very different. So I'm very excited to read those. Let's see. I need to have, I just need to read those, and then I'm going to have Trisha on my channel. I'll have both of the Merediths after interviews. Yeah. Let's see.
I'm saying she'll love to. She'll have to answer in the chat that she would love to, but I know
this is a great question. So I know that you have recorded your own audiobook for Thrice, and Thiago, thank you for bringing that up. So please tell us about the experience of recording your own book.
It was a challenge.
I bet.
So Thrice came out. So this would have been the beginning of 2021, because we decided in 2020 to switch to indie because we had the time now, and so it's like, now's the time, let's do it. We have been thinking about it, but hadn't really gotten around to it. And at that time, there was some talks about other countries across the Pacific Ocean taking books, shoving them through an auto translator of their own design, and then putting up the audiobook of that book. And then when an author 6 months later was putting their book up, Amazon was saying, I'm sorry, you can't, that's plagiarism, because I already see your book is up. Like, no, it was made in China, and Amazon never fights anything in China. I know that from my personal job, is the Chinese manufacturing gets to do what they want on Amazon because it makes Amazon a ton of money. We're not here to talk about that. So I said, you know what? We're going to have our audiobooks come out same day, period. There's no worry about it. Plus, I just want everybody to have my books as audiobooks. So I said, okay, Trisha, we knew somebody local in Spokane who could read it, and oh my gosh, she's amazing. So if you want the audiobooks, check out the audiobooks. Rebecca is just an amazing. She does so many good voices, and I knew I could probably do it because I've done a lot of some stage stuff back in the day. And I said, Rebecca Cook, yeah. I knew I could do it, but I knew it would be a huge learning curve. And I said, you know what? I'm going to spend the money on the mic. The worst that happens is I lose a month of my life because I'm going to record. I'm going to edit it and see if it's any good and see if I still hate my voice afterwards.
Yeah.
And I did lose a month of my life because I recorded it in a week. I was editing it. I got 2/3 through and learned tricks over that and realized I had screwed everything up, and I didn't have my original files because I'm a bad saver. And so I had to start from scratch. So I had lost a whole month of my life, started it over and re-recorded it again. And it was so much better. And even between Thrice and now to Deathless Beast, the recording has even gotten better past that because I just know what I'm doing. But it's a lot of work. There's a reason you pay for audiobook editors. Yep. I am currently spending 6-to-1 ratio of time. So 6 hours for every one finished, which is not too bad. I'd like to get it faster, but that's not too bad if you think about it, because you have to have recorded it. That's an hour. It's going to take you an hour to listen to it. So really, it's only 4 hours of work. Sure. Outside of the recording, which is the fun part, and the listening at the very end. Yep. So it's more like a 4-to-1, but it's a lot of time, and it's draining because I'll be in the evening and it's just like I can't even think straight. I just want to go Google. I just want to go on YouTube now. I'm so done in the middle of me doing it. So because I also don't like editing. So
I don't either. Yeah. Well, I can totally see the draw of that because I know I might try talking my husband into narrating mine. We'll see once I get that far. But yeah, you're right. I can't even imagine. And when I see like the cost of doing the audiobooks, it makes sense. I mean, the amount of work and just the amount of talent it's a form of storytelling. And if you just read the book, it's not going to have the impact that it needs.
I encourage people to try.
Yeah.
If you spent one time on one chapter, but it's like anything. It's like with layouts, right? If you're doing Photoshop, I can Photoshop. It's a drain on my time because it's like you're working for hours and you look up, you're like, man, that was a long hour. No, it was 6 hours. You're like, oh my gosh, I got nothing done. I wish I could pay somebody to do this. And so you pay somebody to do it. And it's the same with audiobooks. You might love it. If you go through and you do a whole chapter and it's like, that's great, and you love the process, then you should record your own audiobook. Yeah. Or at least try. So
let's see. I will not feature any raisin comments, chat. Inside joke from the Discord, if anybody's watching this after the fact and it's like, what is happening? Trisha has all the compliments. I agree, though. I think you have a great voice for fantasy reading, and I'm excited. At some point, I'm gonna grab Thrice's audiobook just because I'd love to hear it and see what the book sounds like read by the author, which is pretty cool.
Well, like Lana on the Discord, she immersion read Thrice. So
Oh, nice.
she got the audiobook and I sent her the ebook and she bought the print book and she immersion read the whole thing.
Wow.
Yeah. In a night and a half, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you have the talent and desire to do it, I think, being read by the author gives it a lot of nuances that it probably wouldn't otherwise have.
Yes.
So that's
Now some
cool.
should not.
Exactly.
I basically will not read the Starship books by Sanderson because I heard him read it at a con and it turned me off too much. And it was just like, I love you, man. You're a great writer, but it tears me out.
Yeah.
And so I just, and maybe I would tove it, but it was just like, it turned me off enough that I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I have other things I can read. But yeah, Sanderson should not record his own audiobooks.
Yeah. Well, I shouldn't probably record mine either because it's all a very largely male cast. So,
well, you could do Garen. You could do Garen when he's young. And
that's
then
true. I actually would love to read middle grade fantasy because I have a fairly androgynous middle grade voice. So that would be fun.
It's that Midwestern comfort.
That's right. That's right. Wizard is causing problems. I can't believe I'm answering this on live. I am not a fan of raisins, but that does not mean that I'm picking a side. So don't pull me into it. I don't want to be part of your shenanigans.
Will you do other dried fruit?
I like craisins. Like I like dried cranberries and stuff. And I like dried other stuff, just raisins. No. And I have a traumatic childhood story for why that I'm not going to share here. And it's not that bad, but, but I'm not going to be part of those shenanigans. So leave me alone, Andrew. Not you, Wizard. So, okay. Well, since we've been talking about kids so much, how do you balance, and this is a question I ask all of the writers I talk to that are parents, how do you balance, all of the incredible amount of work that it takes? And, I know Trisha has the same, your parent and you have book babies. And how do you kind of balance that?
I do mine by getting up at 5 a.m. Which is awful, but I write from 5 a.m. till 7, sometimes now till 9 if I've got the extra time before work. But I get up and I write at 5 a.m. and that's the way I do it because I know my son's not going to wake up till 6, but at 6 o'clock he's awake, period.
Yep.
And very awake. And now he's older, so he's 9 now, so he's awake, but he's upstairs playing Legos, so I can keep writing. But you have to make the time, which is true with any hobby, but even more so with art and with writing, is that if you don't want to write, that's fine. But if you want to write, you have to choose what time you're going to write. That is at the time that as a mom or a dad, that might be 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. And so you have to learn to adapt through practice. And I finally only figured it out last year because I did NaNoWriMo and accomplished it for the first time.
Nice.
And it actually kept me from ever getting seasonally depressed last year because my sense of accomplishment was tied to my flow.
Yeah.
I kept going because I had worked out for 2 months straight. I spent all of November and all of December writing 2,000 words every morning. And because I did it, I had not just a habit, but like working out, it wasn't just a drag. If I left off for 5 days, my body and mind were still in that semi-flow that I could then pick it back up and keep going, as opposed to, I'll write when I feel like it. And then I stop for a month and then I'm on for a month. That's fine. But it's so much harder to get back into flow if you aren't doing it every day for 21 plus days straight and then keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a total night owl, so I commend you for the ability to wake up at 5 a.m. I wouldn't know how to spell my name at 5 a.m.
Trisha's a night owl too, so she writes in the night. She writes at night.
So do I.
And so if I'm beat because I was up at 5 a.m., I'll write and then go to bed with the kids, and she'll roll into bed at midnight and
she'll light her candle.
6 hours.
Yeah.
She enters a much more focused flow state than I do. When she's drafting, she's gone, and that's every night. She'll put 6 hours in till 2 a.m. if it matters. And she's a chaotic So I'm a lawful planner, and she's a chaotic plancer. So she writes different scenes and then puts them all together and writes from back to front, depending on, because she's writing murder mysteries, so you have to work towards that ending. But she can write, I want to write this scene, so she writes it. I want to write this scene. I cannot do that. I have to have my structure, everything goes in order, and then exactly. I'm a lawful planner.
Yeah. I think I'm definitely a chaotic plancer too. I think it depends. I've gotten more planner the older I've gotten, especially now dipping into epic fantasy. I feel like you have to be to some degree in a lot of cases. Not that you can't write it as a pantser, but it probably will take you a lot longer just because you're coming up with it all on the spot, and that can sometimes lead to writer's block and everything else. So
pantsing stresses me out.
Yeah.
When in 2017, when I was writing the first edition of this, I got to the last quarter and I didn't have a plan. I just knew where it was heading, and I was angry for a month, for 3 weeks straight, because I was like, I gotta write, and it just stressed me out so bad. So I was like, no, I can't do this ever again. I have to plan everything. And so I'll spend a good month putting my outline together, and I reassess my outline at huge intervals. So I'll outline a whole book, get halfway through and stop, and reassess the outline again before I continue on, because probably I've used up some of the bullets early on. So
yeah. Speaking of this comment over here, I've been I'm being am I being kicked out of the Discord? No, he's just knocking me a star for all of my future books because I don't like raisins.
That's okay. I already lost a star on Thrice, and he still hasn't read it, because the first time I interacted with him, I called him Bob because I didn't read his name correct. So he is still promised. He owes me a dropped star for that.
So, Bo, is that worse or not as bad as not liking raisins? Everybody's pants are optional, apparently. Let's see. Well, going back to, I'm going to leave that chat alone to do its thing. Going back to, talking about you and Trisha having different writing styles and processes, how both of us are in the unique situation that we are both also married to writers. And I'm always curious about, how does that influence, encourage your writing? Like, what is it like being married to another writer?
So my wife is a very good editor. She will not look at my books or edit my books for the sake of our marriage. More for the sake of me, because I get really butt sore from critiques. When I'm paying somebody, it's not a problem. Go ahead, critique away, because I'm paying you to tell me that. But she does not edit my books, because I'm way too weak-willed for that. And but she listens to my books, and then I get to do a read out loud. So when I finish a draft, I read my book out loud to her while she's doing something, cross stitching or color by number or whatever, and then I'm editing as I go. So it's kind of a broken reading as I'm stop for a second and fix the line and then keep reading. And then she doesn't have to see the typos, because typos tear her out of a book like there's no tomorrow. Like, if there's a typo, she's out. She will never read another Philippa Gregory. She switched entirely over to Alison Weir when she wants to read a historical Renaissance story, because Alison Weir is really accurate, really heavy and dense, and actually edits her books. Philippa Gregory stopped editing her books a long time ago, throwing shade. So she's a very, very accurate editor. She does tons of research, and she'll always say, well, Andrew's writing fantasy because he doesn't have to research. And I was like, yeah, that's basically true. But I do a lot of world building, and I love my world building, and I keep lots of notes. So I have as many notes as she does, just I don't spend time at the archives when she does. So, but because I am a pantser in my world building, I can then throw out 5 options to Sunday for a particular plot point, and now she has something like we say in our house: do this, but do it better. It means, take here's my suggestion. It means nothing, but if this suggestion gets you to the better suggestion, good. So that's what kind of happens in our family is we'll sit there and work through how do we kill this guy.
Yeah. You know what's really funny about that is actually how I first really met my husband Ben. Is we were all in a group of friends in high school, and he was the, like, you know, weird quiet kid off in the corner with his notebook, and he was constantly scribbling. And he asked, like, we were like, Ben, what are you doing over there? And he's like, I'm trying to figure out how to kill a character. And everybody else was like, what? All the non-writers, you know. I was immediately up out my chair, and I went and sat next to him, and I was like, all right, so tell me the context. You know. And that was like the first real interaction we ever had. So I mean, it doesn't get any more writer couple than that, I don't think.
No. Yeah, it doesn't.
Yeah,
I love it. Yeah. And we know, and we've been together for what, 15, 16 years now. So we know each other well enough too that it's one thing when you're editing and like, I'm going to show her this great page. She's going to love it so much. She's not going to have any critique. And she's like, here's the 5 typos in the first line. That hurts because that's my ego being popped. But when we're playing around with story, it's so much fun because we can, and you know, when you're with a friend, it's you can, or with your spouse, you can say, no, not that. You're not saying that in a way that's like, no, you're wrong. It's like, no, wait, I got this cool idea. Let's play with this. And then boom, they've got that. And now you've got a real brainstorming session. It's hard to find people who brainstorm like you.
Yes.
And if you can't find them, brainstorming sucks.
Oh yeah. At least find a writing community, at least, because
absolutely,
totally agree. And it is funny because Ben does read, like, he hears the initial story idea and he reads my first drafts usually. But I'm the same. I would say in my first draft with certain people, I'm pretty thick-skinned when it comes to people reading my stories. But Ben, like, for whatever reason, if Ben's like, well, I don't know if this makes sense, I'm like, yes, it does. You know, like, you have that initial, like, it's fine.
I have a character who was in the original draft. He's a Hrogrin. So a Hrogrin is my homage to both Warhammer 40,000 Tau and Ninja Turtles. So they're my not orcs, and they're they're the merchant race. I love them so much. Well, he was the crown prince, and he's a policeman. So he's basically not a crown prince. He's a prince, and their police force is voluntary. And he was this interspersed story that had nothing to do with the plot, but I really wanted to write it.
Yeah.
And at one point, Trisha was like, "You got to cut him. You're gonna have to pull him out." And I was like, nope, he's perfect. Cannot come out. He has to happen. I have to write this. I've written 30,000 words. He's not going anywhere. And then I came back 2 days later and I said, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry.
Yep.
You were 100% right. He's gone. I'm still going to publish him as his own story. It's going to happen. Yeah. I've written the first book and I still love it. But he could not be in that book.
He wasn't
and she had to stick that knife in my side and say, I'm going to twist this if you don't take him out. And I was like, you're absolutely right. Please pull the knife out.
Yep. Well, and they know us better than anybody else, so they can say, you know. Yeah. Well, that's awesome. Yeah, that's something that I think I feel very blessed to have experienced, being able to have those, you know, laying in bed at night right before you fall asleep, and you're like, I had this idea today, and just brainstorm it for, 20 minutes, which then turns into like 2 hours of brainstorming with the big sheet of paper, and you're scribbling all. Yeah. That's always fun.
I love that.
Wizard says, y'all are making me want to write again. Well, do it.
Yeah. It's not like you don't it's not like you don't know people who will read it for you.
Right. Exactly. Like, he has a built-in Discord of beta readers immediately. So kind of as a last final comment, unless anybody else in the chat wants to stop talking about raisins and offer some questions. What advice would you give to new writers?
Spend time getting to know yourself first as a writer. Even though you have that great idea you really want to start getting to writing on, don't. Take 6 months. Make a plan to discover who you are as a writer and author. So figure out what is your pacing? What is the best time of day to write for you? What is, like, my pacing is 1,000 words. Every 1,000 words is a plot point. Mm-hmm. And I know that is my personal plot point. I can shimmy that a little bit wider or smaller, but it's almost always 1,000 words. Other people are going to have shorter plot points. Know yourself so that you can plan better what you're going to do. If you just say, no, I'm just going to write this, it's like, got it. You don't have a plan because you don't know who you are. You got to have your tools in your toolbox. You have to own a toolbox before you start building. And you can just start buying a hammer and nails and making stuff. That's great. But buy yourself a good toolbox by investing in yourself for 6 months.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point, because I agree. Like, I think a lot of people, I remember I had a friend who came to me and she was all excited. She had an epic fantasy idea and she's like, can I please tell you about it? I was like, yeah, absolutely. So she starts telling me, and I said, okay, from what you've been telling me, I'm hearing more kind of a YA, level fantasy, something, whatever. And she was like, oh, really? Like, but I have a really, like, the world, like these little, and I said, well, the world that you're telling me about needs to get a lot, like, there needs to be more in it first. And that's fine. I said, what are some of your influence authors? Like, who do you like to read? What kind of stories do you like reading about, whether it's epic fantasy or not? And she said, well, I've never actually read an epic fantasy. And I said, well, I want you to put it down, put it away. And I want you to go get like 3 or 4 books and just start somewhere. You like, not to say there wouldn't be that one person that could write a beautiful epic fantasy without ever having read it. Totally possible. But I was like, you've never even read one. And like, go figure out what it looks like, or what it could look like, and then come back and we'll talk about it. So yeah, I think a lot of people jump in, like, and by all means, get out your notebook, jot down your ideas, keep all of that and write it down. Don't just keep it in your head.
Yes.
But Chiago says step 1 is buy whiskey. There are nights when you're just about ready to tear all your hair out. Yeah, there are some great Discords too. For anybody watching this after the fact, there are some incredibly excellent Discords to get you started if you are looking for a writing community, or just inspiration, or some people that are around you that are as crazy as you are. Let any of us know and get in touch with me or Andrew on Twitter, and we can definitely point you in that direction. But
my tag on all social is Andrew D MTH, like Andrew to the nth power. So if I'm at Andrew D mth on everywhere. Nice.
All right. Well, unless anybody has any last minute questions, which I'm going to assume not at this point. Andrew, thank you so much for being on my channel.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very excited to get my copy of Deathless Beast and get started on this. I'm committing to this. I'm here for this 16-book saga. I'm very excited to read it. And best of luck with your launch on November 1st.
Thank you.
Everybody needs to go down in the description box and check out all of Andrew's links. Those are all down there.
On pre-order now.
It's on pre-order. So yeah, I'm very excited for the book, to read it, to read Patricia's books. And yeah, big thanks for being on my channel.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.